Shalom from Jerusalem and welcome back to Watchmen Talk, a series of conversations with Israeli experts and practitioners in the domains of military, intelligence, and diplomacy. And our special guest today for a second part of our conversation is Ambassador Ron Prosor. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you have been posted to Germany, to the Great Britain, to the United Nations, and as the head of the Professional Foreign Services Director General of the Foreign Ministry, and will soon go back to Germany, this time as the ambassador, after spending some years in retirement as the head of the Abba Ibn academic center in Herzliya, next to Tel Aviv, having written a book about your diplomatic exploits, or undiplomatic, as you call them, soon to be translated into other languages than Hebrew. So in the early or late 1990s, you were told that you are going to Washington. Was that a dream for a foreign service officer?
The funny thing is that I thought that I would continue with my German expertise after serving in Germany from 88 and 92, and seeing the wall fall down in Germany and a whole historical change. And I was quite surprised when I was nominated to Washington. Directly from London, but I think that the years that I was there, 1998 to 2002, Wye River Memorandum, Camp David, the transition from Clinton to Bush, and 9/11 were enough to write 2 books. But from my point of view, was, I think, the most strategic posting that I had to really understand the core of Israel's defense and foreign policy. Only, I think, in Washington can you really deeply understand this amazing relationship that has effects all over the world.
But it's very rare that a professional foreign service officer gets appointed to the embassy as the ambassador of Israel. Usually it's a political appointee, or at least it is decided because of political considerations. So this was not in the cards, not at that time, but even later.
Being ambassador where? To the United Nations? Yeah.
To the United States.
Yeah. I wasn't ambassador to the United States. Yeah. So in the sense, when I came to Washington as the political counselor to Washington, D.C., this is perceived, and I think rightly so, as the number one political position, because you head the political section at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., and it gives you an amazing vantage point to understanding.
Above you were the DCM, the Deputy Chief of Mission, and the ambassador.
Yeah.
But the ambassador at that time, or at least part of the time, David Ivry, was usually taking care of other business and was not a public persona.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of room for maneuver.
Yes, I had a lot of room for maneuver. And I think here, what I did was something that I write about. I came in 1998, and everyone focused on the Democratic side with Al Gore and Clinton, and there was an amazing relationship. And I decided to focus on the Republican side.
But this is the oldest rule in the book. Be in with the outs.
Absolutely. But I was the only one that did that. I went to Richard Pearl, and I asked him, if Republican, give me,
Richard Pearl was a Henry Jackson Democrat, but the Democrats during the Reagan period moved rightward.
Okay. And so basically I asked, who is on the list on the Republic if you guys come in? And by coincidence, and this is, a combination of hard work and luck, most of the people that I connected to when they were not in position went into very senior positions.
National Security Council, Department of State, Department of Defense.
Vice President's office, really And in the sense, it was amazing, because you know how it is, I think, in every place. When you know someone, when he was not in position, you basically have a dialogue. He was in your house, you talked. I think it's a different story. And from my point of view, it was really gratifying to see, and very effective and constructive for the
Well,
sake of
you
Israel.
invest in a share when it's not in demand.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden, it's the hottest commodity in town.
Absolutely. So in the sense, Washington was an amazing time.
Now, you mentioned the Y River,
Memorandum.
first the conference,
Yeah.
then the memorandum, and then you had Shepherdstown and Camp David.
Sure.
How much did the politicians coming from Israel with their delegations, how much did they make use of the professionals on the embassy staff at Washington?
So here, I think we created the infrastructure, but as politicians are at that level, and you saw it at Y, they deal with the counterparts and very, very acute to the political implications. So just think, in Israel, who participated? It was Bibi Netanyahu, Ariel Sharon, Itzik Mordechai, Sharansky. Sharansky was the only one.
These are foreign ministers.
Yeah, 4 minutes. Basically, Sharansky was the only one that could talk to all three of them. They barely talked to each other. So it was really interesting to see that interaction. And for me, for the first time, to see, both Clinton and Al Gore run around with sweaters in a informal capacity.
And the late Madeleine Albright, who just passed away.
Absolutely. And we moved with the Palestinian delegation. It was seeing a setting of how a international, conference and negotiations take place, which are very different than what sometimes we read in books.
So this is late 1998, and a few months later, Netanyahu is defeated by Ehud Barak, who then comes over to Washington and for the meetings with the Syrians at Shepherdstown and with Arafat at Camp David in the year 2000.
That's right.
What was the experience from your point of view?
So I'm taking out of it something, for me, after Camp David, what dawned on me, which was different than what I thought in the past. Because in the past, I thought Israel really didn't make a serious offer on the table. After that, and the reaction that came, it brought great questions marks for me. Do they really want peace?
The Palestinians.
The Palestinians. And it's something that, for me, that question was raised for the first time because I was there. You can argue, how much, Barak put on the table. It was 97%, 95%. But wow, this was a serious offer on the table, which the Palestinians, in the sense, reacted with violence and terror. And for me, it was until today, I think something, Amir, from my point of view, also my political, was to really see that happening. It's not, we had a lot of things happening afterwards, but this was something that still is in my mind as a question.
One problem with the diplomatic progress is that the election cycles in Israel and the United States are not synchronized. Sometimes it does happen that two new president and prime minister come in, but it cuts off the progress made until the very last day of the preceding administration. This happened with Kissinger when Carter came in, and with Baker when Clinton came in, and with the time that you are talking about when Clinton, up until his very last moment in office, tried to salvage a deal. And then we had to wait for perhaps 9/11 and other efforts to start and recreate something out of chaos.
Yeah, but it's important to emphasize that it wasn't because of Clinton or Barak. Here, we tend to sometimes not say it was because, and I think Clinton, in all, although diplomatically, basically made it clear that the fault here was on Arafat and the Palestinians. Maybe it wasn't enough support from the Arab world, but bottom line, here it wasn't for the lack of trying, okay?
Well, after 9/11, a friend and colleague of yours, Harry Kneital, who was one of Israel's ambassadors in Europe, arranged a meeting with Javier Solana, who at the time was no longer with NATO, he was with the European Union. And during the conversation, he asked whether he could present a question to me. So I said, of course, go ahead. He said, why doesn't Arafat act like Musharraf? Musharraf of Pakistan knew enough to change his policy right after 9/11 and help United States and get on the good side of President Bush. Arafat stayed the same course, believing that violence will get him somewhere. It didn't.
Absolutely not. And it's a great tragedy.
So you came back from Washington. You had to spend time at headquarters.
So I was first nominated as Deputy Director General for Strategic Affairs. This was setting a precedent. I was nominated to something I really actually knew something about. But afterwards, I became Chief of Policy Staff to Minister Silvan Shalom, and then headed the Foreign Ministry, both during Silvan's time and afterwards during Tzipi Livni's time as Foreign Minister.
She was really amazing. Seeing her work in Brussels, when she came to a NATO ministerial, was seeing not only a hard-working foreign minister, but also quite esteemed by her colleagues.
Absolutely. She received a lot of, I think, respect. And it was also interesting that she really, from, the house that she came from and the ideology, the right wing, she really was honest, she was tough, she really, I think, wanted to reach an agreement, still maintaining something about, Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, that people don't give her enough credit. She was the one with Sharon that basically talked about this very seriously. I enjoyed very much working with her. And she was the one that nominated me to the United Kingdom.
Now, before you went to London, as Director General of the Foreign Ministry, you probably saw a lot of cabinet meetings.
Yeah.
Also during the war in Lebanon in 2006. And the National Security Staff was established. What was the staff level working group which you belonged to? What was there one?
Okay, so this is a very good point. As Director General of the Foreign Ministry, you are privy, you're part of the cabinet meetings on Sunday. By the way, a lot of business can be done because you have the other Director Generals with you. So this was working, and you see the government and the way it operates, and you basically prepare the Foreign Minister on the things that he's saying before the cabinet. Or she, of course. So this was important. But still, when you look at the defense establishment and the people around the Prime Minister, you have the military advisor, you have, the
Chief of Staff and Chief of Intelligence.
Yeah. And you don't have anyone from the Foreign Ministry. The only one in the Foreign Ministry is usually the Deputy National Security Advisor for Foreign Affairs, okay? And he does not participate. I think that's a huge mistake. It's a huge mistake because that element is really important to have there. I'll give you an example. During Shomer Chomot,
Guardian of the Walls.
Guardian of the Walls, for example,
this was last May.
Last May, the army, because of some computer, basically came out and said, we managed to destroy the metro in Gaza.
The underground network where the Hamas operatives ran into.
Okay, so someone like me afterwards reacted automatically. And if I was have been there or anyone else, I would say, guys, don't use the metro as an analogy, because the one sitting in France eating a croissant in the boulangerie or patisserie is, he won't be able to really take it down, because the metro is something that...
And indeed, we saw during the Russia-Ukraine war, civilians hiding in the metro tunnels in Kiev.
Absolutely. So in the underground, the tube in London, the underground in New York, this was an analogy that if someone would be there, easy stuff would be, of course, change. But not just that. It's really understanding on, how the world looks, how much time you have in the Security Council to operate, and. So we really need someone there at the high level that is able to give guidance to decision makers in times of crisis.
Now, London. Washington is obviously the pinnacle of diplomacy, the capital of the world, as London was 60, 80, 100 years ago. But then if you go down one rung on the ladder, what are the most important embassies for Israel nowadays?
So I think, truthfully, now I think after the United States and the UN, you have...
You put the UN on the same level?
Yes, because it's, in essence, you're like the ambassador to the world, and you have a free hand to enter, and you see the whole world reacting. So it's I think, I would say that this is the case. In Washington, I still think that Washington, but the amount of people that are on the line and the different avenues basically create a situation where the ambassador is not the only address, okay? At the UN, I think you're still an address, much more, because you're there. And I would put Germany as in Europe as the leading country. Germany, France, the UK is now out of the EU. But
you didn't prevent Brexit.
I didn't prevent Brexit, but I'm saying that although the United Kingdom and France are part of the Security Council, which elevates them, I still would say that Germany and its influence inside Europe and also towards Israel, I think ranks high.
How important is the ambassador to the European Union when we know that the bilateral relations with the member states are more important?
So, look, it's like, international structures. I think it's important because the mechanics and the hydraulics of the European Union, it's like the UN, it's a big machine. And you have to understand how this machine works in order to be effective and also to prevent problems from this machinery.
As a parliamentarian.
And also, look, you have a government. Most people don't know that the European Union has a government which is called the Commission. And I don't want to get into but in essence, you have to know how to operate with the commissioners. You have to know how to operate on the parliamentary level. And it's a huge, huge challenge for Israel. Although, truthfully, when you have ambassadors working correctly in the different countries in Europe, of course, it adds and helps the ambassador.
How important is the prime minister in Britain nowadays? You don't have a Churchillian figure or a Thatcher. And even Tony Blair has come and gone, and after that, you don't see people of either gender of high stature.
So I would say the following, and if you allow me, I'll take your question and widen it. What happens to foreign ministries today, all over the world? Okay, not just in Israel, but all over the world, and I'm emphasizing democratic countries, not Russia or China. you see a transition for decision makers that the foreign affairs are being dealt from 10 Downing Street or the White House, or let's take Israel as an example. You see that as a trend. The Élysée in France, and not just the Quai d'Orsay, which is the French Foreign Ministry. And why is that? I think it's because in today's world, foreign ministries have to give decision makers an added value. They need expertise. They cannot be the jack of all trades. So it basically puts a big question mark. And my take as a professor now at the university is basically to look and say, hey, if the structures, the way foreign ministries operate, both internally and if they don't change the way they think and operate, they might become distinct like dinosaurs. So we have to change, use technology, and understand that the position of an ambassador today is completely different than when it was 100 years ago.
Well, maybe not 100 years ago, but 50 or 30 years ago, cables were the coin of the realm. And it's very good for diplomatic historians. But now they have been overtaken by WhatsApp, email, or the regular phone call. And there is hardly any record to look into when your principals are talking, picking up the phone and very casually arranging stuff behind your back.
So I think it's, first of all, it's not behind the back, but what you see is the technology, and you're absolutely right. They talk to each other, they phone. And I think this is not going to change, it's going to even intensify. So what really happens? The minute, for example, a prime minister talks with his counterpart, someone has to do the follow-up. So the words turn into actions. This is what the foreign ministry should do. And basically needs to do that and create from a conversation something which is operational. And I think that we have enough, expertise to be able to do that. And I would even say that if we're talking about innovative diplomacy, here we are, Israel, as a startup nation. We have all the technology. We're not using, for example, face recognition to move forward in the consular side, passports, visas. We should be able to do that. And by the way, it will cost much less. Secondly, big data. We have cutting edge technologies. And we should look at every country in like a consumer life to target the people in what interests them and pass the relevant messages, short, to the point.
Narrowcast rather than broadcast.
Absolutely, narrowcast. And then you have, for example, virtual reality. So you can sit in Buenos Aires and basically I can walk you through the tunnels of Hezbollah or Hamas and give you a feeling. So in the sense,
if you live in Israel, you do live in virtual reality all the time.
But I'm saying this is, technology in the hands of diplomacy, and we should be able to do that and maybe be the first ones to really be on the cutting edge.
One additional advantage of being the permanent representative to the United Nations, which is a long way of saying the ambassador to the UN, is that you can deal with countries which do not have diplomatic relations with Israel. Now, what can you unveil of these secret meetings?
First of all,
they will not remain secret if you do that, but please.
No, but it's first of all, you're absolutely right. In German, you say "Küss mich nicht unter den Linden." Don't kiss me in the main road of Berlin.
Unter den Linden.
So we basically talk to countries that we don't have diplomatic ties. We didn't do that in the General Assembly Hall. New York is a lot of place. I can say, for example, that Pakistan was an example of something that my former colleague and myself started at the UN. When I was Director General, I continued, and it came up in the meeting between the Foreign Minister of Pakistan and Silvan Shalom with a Turkish
Interlocutor.
in the Four Seasons in Istanbul. And this was Musharraf basically checking. So stories like that, I have a lot, but I think people in Israel and the world would be amazed and surprised at the outreach and the countries that Israel talks to under the radar screen.
And sometimes you prepare a meeting between the heads of governments of state during the General Assembly, when the GA convenes each autumn.
Yeah.
This is the time for such secret meetings on the highest level.
Because they all flock into New York. Our spectators should know that in New York, for the General Assembly, anyone can come in, even if a mass murderer, a dictator, that you won't receive a visa to the United States, you're allowed to come to New York in a 25-mile radius from the UN. So, in essence, everyone can come in for these 2 weeks of the General Assembly.
This is the Manhattan Project. Now, Ambassador Ron Prosor, luckily for you, we only have like 30 or 40 seconds, so you won't be able to say everything you want to say about the German assignment ahead of you, but a few words.
First of all, for me personally, it's closing a circle. My father is from Berlin. I think I'm coming to Germany not just with a different political leadership, but Germany which is beginning to question the whole posture of what they would call the Ostpolitik and German-Russian relations, which has, I think, a huge, huge influence both inside Europe and outside Europe. And I'm really looking forward for the challenge.
So an exciting new time for Germans, both the new chancellor and the new Israeli ambassador. Ron Prosor, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you. We will be here again for another edition of Watchmen Talk soon. This is TV7 News, Israel. Goodbye from Jerusalem.